about your world. You're here at the Growth Forum. I've learned a bunch of things just sitting back there for the last half hour. I'm going to switch all of my insurance to you guys based on the demonstration, so that's good. Oh, that was pretty cheap. I'm surprised you clapped. But you are in a huge period of explosive growth. Gregor told me 40% year over year. That's outstanding. It's also exhausting and maybe a little bit stressful. How many of you feel this way? And taking our foot off the gas is very tempting in times like this. We're being successful. But you know that you've got to focus on the safety of your members. You've got to help them pursue their passions. And luckily, you have these amazing success behaviors. Your competitors don't have them. And the first time I heard this one in particular, I was ecstatic. You're obsessed with getting better. And that's what this is about today and this week. What I want to help you do is sort of maybe appreciate in a new way how important and foundational self-awareness is for you to make all of that happen. So for you, you might be a sales and marketing manager. You might be an underwriting leader. You might be a department head. But for each and every person in this room, your ability to push the boundaries, to continually get better, to explore what's possible, rests on your ability to build relationships, to influence, to understand how you're coming across, the impact you're having on others, your strengths and your weaknesses. And that's why this is such a foundational skill. Now, I mentioned earlier that self-awareness is like the management buzzword right now. And in my career, I've been an organizational psychologist for almost 15 years now. And it was always really clear to me that the leaders who worked on honing their self-awareness were more successful. And kind of one Christmas, business was slow, because everybody was out for the holidays. I thought, I wonder what we actually know from a research perspective about this topic. So I started geeking out. And I was doing all these lit searches, and I was really surprised at how little we knew scientifically about self-awareness. And for me, I thought if we're tossing this term around and we're saying, it's important, making these blanket statements, we had to actually know, is it what we think it is? Does it do what we think it does? And probably most importantly, are the ways that we universally accept as paths to self-awareness, is that really the right direction? And as you'll see, we uncovered so many myths, the things we think are true about knowing ourselves, that turned out not to hold water. Here is the most important barrier out there. And again, there are so many, but this is what we have time for today. The barrier is thinking that we are already self-aware. If I were you, and if I were sitting in this audience listening to someone like me say all these things, here's what I'd be thinking 3 years ago. Well, the other people in this room sure have a lot of work to do. How many of you will fess up to that? Good, honesty, I love it. Let me just give you an example that illustrates that we are all, even self-awareness researchers, in this together. So I met my husband at work, very scandalous. We've been married for about 8 years, and I've known him for about 10. And when you sort of meet someone and all of their friends end up being amazing, you hit the jackpot, they become your friends too. So a couple of years ago, I was literally in the thick of this self-awareness research. That pile of articles that I just showed you was kind of strewn about my office. And my husband said, Tasha, you need to get out of the house. I was like, yeah, it's probably a good idea. So we met about 6 of our friends. Again, most of them were his friends first and are my friends now also. And we went to dinner. We were having so much fun, we didn't want to go home. So I was the designated driver that evening, and I was soberly sipping club soda, and my friends were not sipping club soda. So they were imbibing and having fun. So we get to this bar, we push all these high-top tables together, and my friend Teresa kind of slinks up and sits next to me, and she's really happy. And I looked at her and I said, Teresa, what's going on? And she said, oh, Tasha, I just wanted to tell you how grateful we are that Dave brought you into our lives all of those years ago?" And before I could respond, she continued, and she said, and I quote, "And boy, have you come a long way since we first met you." I felt professionally obligated to figure out what she was talking about, but you guys, I've got to tell you, I had no idea what she was talking about. So I kind of bared down in my chair, I took a sip of water, and I said, "Okay, Teresa, lay it on me. Where did I come from? Where is it that I started?" And I'll spare you the details, mostly for my own pride, but I learned that apparently when I first met my husband and all of our friends, and we all worked together, they saw me as kind of high maintenance. Yeah. So I thought, okay, all right. Well, thank you very much for that feedback, Teresa, and I was excited to prove her wrong. So on the car ride home, I'm at the driver's seat, my husband, very merry, in the passenger seat. And I said, "Dave, can I run something by you?" He goes, "Yeah, sure." So I told him what Teresa has said. Dead silence next to me. Dead silence. And then sort of meekly, he goes, "Is this a trick question?" And I thought, oh, okay, well, I know what the answer is. The answer is yes, he sees it too, or he saw it too. And so I asked him to give me some examples, because that's what I would advise my leaders that I work with. And he gave me plenty. And right, it was a long ride home. So I'll share one with you, just in the spirit of we're all in this together. So the first thing he told me was, "You remember when you first were hired and all of your peers had hard-walled offices?" I said, "Yes, I do." He said, "Do you remember where they stuck you?" I said, "They stuck me in a cubicle." And he said, "Yeah, and what happened?" And I said, "Well, I had to get an office. It was a quest for justice and fairness and equality and what was right." And Dave said, "Can you imagine how that looked to us?" And I just had this moment of, oh my God. Have you guys ever had this happen, where you are completely sure about why you're doing something, that you're doing it for the right reasons, and other people just have a completely different perception? And so that sat with me for weeks. And thankfully, I had come a long way, so I wasn't quite that bad anymore. But it was actually one of the most powerful insights that I've had about how I show up in a professional setting. So the barrier, thinking we're self-aware, is there for each and every one of us every day. So let's start with a very basic definition. As you'll see, self-awareness is actually a little more complicated definitionally than it seems. But here's what my research team and I use. The definition is understanding who we are and how we're seen. Who we are and how we're seen. Now, I would go so far as to call self-awareness the meta skill of the 21st century. The meta skill, what does that mean? Researchers for many years, including myself, but many, many others, have found that people who are self-aware, and for our purposes, leaders who are self-aware, are happier, they make better decisions, they have better relationships. At work, they are higher performers who get more promotions. At home, they raise more mature children, they have better marriages, and there's even evidence that self-aware leaders actually lead more profitable companies. Very interesting stuff. But I would guess that none of you in this room are surprised. I have some fellow self-awareness geeks, right? Here's what I want you to think about, though, that might be a little bit new. Self-awareness is the meta skill because it essentially sets the upper limit for every other skill we need in the 21st century to be successful. Things like collaboration, influence, communication, emotional intelligence. And so we can only be as good at those things as we are self-aware. So last year, you guys had an incredibly impressive winner of the CLO of the Year, Audrey Masonet-Morales. And I was reading this article about her, and it just came sort of screaming out at me. She said that the three characteristics that talent leaders need: an innovative mindset, business acumen, and relationship building. And I saw those, and immediately it became clear that self-awareness was underlying them, right? For innovation, we have to understand what our assumptions are. We have to see how we're seeing things. For business acumen, those of us that maybe didn't grow up with a P&L have to know what we know and what we don't know. And then finally, relationship building, obviously, we need to know how other people see us and the impression we're making on them. Now here's where it gets a little bit disconcerting. The second lesson we've learned is that almost everyone has a bit of work to do on their self-awareness. We've found in our research that 95% of people believe that they're self-aware. 95%. Any guesses for what percentage of people actually are self-aware? Just yell them out. We're getting warmed up for the day. 35. I would love to live in a world where 35% of people are self-aware. Okay, ready for this? 10 to 15%. Just think about that delta, 95%, 10 to 15%. You know what that means, don't you? It means that on a good day, 80% of us are lying to ourselves about whether we're lying to ourselves. And I'll talk about this later briefly, but I am not immune from this either. I've learned in this project how much work I have to do in my self-awareness. So there's something comforting about that. We're not alone. The journey is never finished, and we're all in this together. The robo-investors are taking over, right? The commoditization of investment management is happening. And what I argue is that one of the ways you can out-human those robo-investors is self-awareness. So it's not just you. It's not just having to understand who you are, how you're perceived by your company, what kind of culture you're creating. It's also about instilling that feeling, that expertise in people, in the people that work for you. And the reason is, robo-investors can't compete with that. If every single person in your company is connecting with your customers on a deep, personal level, there's no competition, right? So for each of you, what I'd ask is, are your people ready, willing, and able to do that? I came across a study recently that said 74% of financial advisors see their customers as increasingly wanting more general life support beyond just helping them pick numbers. And if you're like a lot of my clients in this world, you didn't go into business to hold people's hands, right? Or be their life coach. But whether you like it or not, that is what the expectation is growing to become. So how do you compete with that? So review over. Hopefully we've got a lay of the land. Now we're going to talk about you. So we're talking about self-awareness of CFOs. We've got all of you in the room. We're going to start with just a quick self-assessment. Sound fair? So what I'm going to do is put up 3 roles that you play in your life and your work. And what I want you to do is categorize yourself. I want you to say, I am either below average, I'm average, or I am above average on this thing. And if you want to have a little fun, you can look around the room at what your colleagues are voting. All right, so the first one, what kind of a CFO are you? So I'm going to ask by a raise of hands, how many of you are a below average CFO or financial leader? One gentleman, we'll talk afterwards, sir. What about average? Average, okay. How many of you are above average? Oh my gosh, this is amazing. This is incredible. Next, what kind of a friend are you? How many of you are a below average friend? A couple of you are like, I don't want everyone to know, but yes, I am. What about average friend? Okay. What about above average friends? Wow, this is the above average friend convention. All right, this one is where it gets a little personal, so buckle your seatbelts. Ready? What kind of a driver are you? How many of you are below average drivers? I'm going to cop to that, yeah. What about average? Okay, a couple people. and raise them high, raise them proud. How many of you are above average drivers? Holy cow, look at this. Once again, it's the above average driver convention, apparently. You have talents in many areas. Now, not that this is happening in this room, but there is a phenomenon in psychology, aptly named the above average effect. And with the above average effect, we've shown, me and other colleagues, that most people tend to believe that they are above average on almost every socially desirable characteristic. So we think we're smarter, funnier, more socially skilled. We think we're better drivers, better leaders than usually or often we objectively are. Now, about half of us are going to be above average. So this isn't a simple case of saying we're all delusional. But it's an interesting phenomenon when we think about self-awareness. It prevents us right off the bat, many of us at least, from seeing ourselves clearly. So you know these people, right? They're walking around everywhere. They have this overly positive view of themselves that has no basis whatsoever in reality. Okay, let's do a little therapy. How many of you know one of these people? How many of you have worked for one of these people? Or dated, or married one of these people? Okay, support group over here. That's an unusually high number of hands. I don't know what that means. So they're among us, they're everywhere. And I use the term delusional, somewhat dramatically, but we feel this lack of self-awareness almost everywhere, in every area of our lives. So each and every day, we show up at work. We interact with people from other departments. We talk to broker partners. And we don't always really, truly know the shadow that we're casting. And I mentioned earlier that that's especially true for leaders. You think about who in your life at work is coming up to you every day and saying, hey, can we debrief that meeting? I want to let you know how you did. Or do you mind if I give you some feedback? Is anyone in this room excited when they hear that question? Do you mind if I give you some feedback? Good. You're going to score well on this quiz we're about to take. So just think about your relationship with feedback. For most people, it's very ambivalent. We know we need it, and yet we fear it, because sometimes not only is it stuff we don't want to know or we don't want to believe, but it's delivered poorly. Adding insult to injury, there's something called the mum effect that researchers discovered all the way back in the 1960s that basically says people, in order to avoid telling us something about ourselves that's negative, right? So for me, I am going to avoid telling my husband what I really think of him as much as I can. And in some cases, I might go so far as to even lie or fib to get out of it. And then you think about what happens at work. This is just elevated. So this mum effect is real. And so many leaders, you get wrapped up in what you're doing, and you're just going and producing and achieving things. And we assume that if we're doing something particularly bad, that someone will tell us. But that's not always the case. In fact, it's usually not the case. But you might ask, is there a penalty of some kind? If I seek critical feedback and go to my team and say, what can I do better? I think it's a fair question to say, is that going to make me lesser in some way in their eyes? The opposite is true. The research on this has shown that leaders who seek critical feedback on a regular basis are more successful. 83% of top performing leaders ask for regular critical feedback, and only 17% of low performing leaders ask for regular critical feedback. Now, you can imagine why it's critical feedback that we're rewarded for. You think about if one day you walked into a team meeting that you were leading and said, hey guys, we're going to spend 5 minutes talking about all the great stuff I'm doing. Right? Just tell me what's working for you. I'd love to hear. That's easy. And that's the stuff that will naturally come to you. You've got to work to learn the ugly truth. Each and every one of us has to work every single day to get this feedback. The unicorns that we talked to, I was expecting that when I interviewed them, they would say something like, oh my gosh, I love getting critical feedback. It's my favorite thing ever. What did they actually say? They said, are you kidding? I hate hearing that I'm not perfect. And so that's freeing to me. What it says is, it's really about our courage and our determination to learn this ugly truth so that we can ultimately be empowered to do something about it.